again, a very warm welcome to you all, everyone. My name is Kevin Burns, the mayor of Geneva, calling you via my cell phone. I apologize for not being able to join you via video. I also have the honor of serving as the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus Environmental Committee and Energy Subcommittee Chair. And we are having a broad and important discussion this morning regarding federal and state climate and resilience funding, climate pollution reduction grants, and the Illinois Climate Bank. So as all of you know, for a few years, it's oftentimes felt like local governments and businesses were pretty much on their own to lead meaningful climate action. And it feels awesome to finally have state and federal governments stepping up on climate and demonstrating substantial investments. The Climate and Equitable Jobs Act in Illinois has impacted many areas of our work. Today, we will hear about how the Illinois Finance Authority will carry out some of the goals of CEJA by serving as Illinois' climate bank. First, we will learn specifically about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which will provide millions to the state of Illinois and the Chicago metropolitan statistical area to complete climate action plans. My friend and your friend, Aaron Newman, first started supporting our regional work on climate in 2017 when we held our first Mayor's Climate Forum in Chicago. He was there to help us kick off our regional climate action planning process in 2019. Aaron has worked closely with us to implement Greenest Region Compact goals throughout the GRC core and supported our work on environmental justice and energy policy. Erin is an environmental scientist with the United States EPA Region 5, where she has served with more than 22 years. She earned degrees in environmental science from both Duke University and perhaps the greatest small liberal arts college of all time, my alma mater, Augustana College. Erin, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Mayor Burns. Yes, go Augie. Let me pull up my screen. We all want to talk about Augustana. So thanks for having me today. Let me try to put this into a presenter mode. Start from the beginning, that'd be great. Okay, can everyone see the slides? Just double checking.
Yes.
We're good? Okay, thank you. All right, well, thanks again. I know a lot of folks have already met me before, but my name is Erin. I work for EPA Region 5. I have two roles there right now. I work as the Region 5 Climate Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Coordinator, which is sort of a new role that came up last year. But I also work on air deposition issues, and I only mentioned the second part because that's going to come in later. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, or as we call them at EPA, CPRG program. We can't have a program without an acronym, so that's kind of how it rolls over here. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on with that and set a little context for it and how I think this will go forward. I wanted to start with a definition for those of you who, I know folks on the groups know about climate mitigation versus climate adaptation, mitigation, reducing emissions, and adaptation, dealing with impacts. And there are certainly areas that overlapped in both. I just want to say the Inflation Reduction Act is almost primarily a climate mitigation program. And everything I'm going to be talking about today is a climate mitigation program. So not that I don't care about flood protection and infrastructure and all those things, but that has not been the focus under IRA. There are some very small subset programs for adaptation, but overall, we're looking at how do you reduce greenhouse gases in the air? So the Inflation Reduction Act was passed last August. This was a lot of money for us. We're like basically doubling the EPA budget. So we were pretty shocked by the amount of funding that's coming in. But really the goal of this is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by about 40%. And there's also a strong goal to look at what we can do to support folks in what we're calling LIDEC, another low income and disadvantaged communities. So another acronym for us. And so this has been a goal, and we have an amazing amount of funding to work with. We're also doing this from a lot of different directions. So we are working with, we're working in our vehicle program, trying to look at diesel. We're coming in from the top with the climate plans, which is where the CPRG program sits in the top right. We are looking bottom up at our environmental justice programs and trying to figure out like how to build up these climate programs. And then we're looking across the sectors that we think are most important related to greenhouse gas emissions and how we can reduce them. Another way to look at this is these are a lot of the sectors that we are focused on. And this is the sectors of IRA only that the Office of Air and Radiation are dealing. There's a whole other group that I mentioned before that, like the EJ program is running out of our Office of Environmental Justice. These are the programs that the air program is leading at EPA under IRA. So we are looking at methane, which is a high global warming compound. There are clean air monitoring grants. We're doing their diesel reduction program, which has been in effect for a long time. We're looking at port emissions. Ports are one of the largest sources of emissions in the country because not only they have a ton of freight that doesn't move, plus typically a lot of rail freight, and it's always there. Like there's always equipment on site. So that's another sector. But the part we're going to talk about today is the one with the palm trees. So that's nice, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. And so in this, it's a two-stage program. The first is the planning grant program, which we are well underway for. We released the NOFO for this on March 1st. And these are non-competitive grants, which we are giving, which we offer to all of the states plus 2 territories. Our tribes, our federally recognized tribes, and then the largest 67 municipal statistical areas or MSAs in the country. And so $3 million per state, $1 million per MSA, and tribes up to somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million if they come in a consortia, and less if they come in separately. So that is already underway, and I have a schedule for that on another slide. This will be followed by another notice of funding opportunity or NOFO coming later this year for implementation grants. And this is obviously the bulk of the money, the $4.6 billion, and this will be a competitive process to look for projects that would be completed under the planning grants. And so, as I mentioned, these are how we broke out the funding that we have for just the planning grants. We only had 4 states turn down the funding. We had all but one of the local governments accept the funding. And so the government that got picked up was actually in Region 5, so that was kind of nice for us. We were able to get Dayton in as the last one. The territories, and then at $25 million set aside for tribes. And so these grants, in trying to figure out the way the Congress gave us the act, that we have to sort of fund the implementation money quickly, we try to figure out how to do this. And so in order to do that, these are 4-year planning grants, but we're really looking at this very short deadline, frankly, for what we're calling a PCAP, a Priority Climate Action Plan. And so these are near-term implementation-ready greenhouse gas reduction measures. And so these were the types of things that we will be looking to fund under the implementation money. But we are hoping that we are requiring, if you take this money, I should say, that organizations develop a long-term plan or a comprehensive climate action plan. I think one question people ask is, then how are we going to fund that? And that's a great question. I think one of the goals of this program is to demonstrate that there is, although the amount of billions of dollars we have is amazing, it's still not enough to change everything we would need to change under the CCAPs. But we're hoping that, the PCAPs, we can use the implementation money for to fund many of those types of projects. So you have 4 years to put together the comprehensive climate action plan. And we really want folks to look across all different sectors. And then during this, there will be regular status reports and check-in calls, et cetera, with all of the lead agencies for the planning grants. We are asking for coordination between each of the different levels of government that accepted these planning grants for funding. In Illinois did accept the funding, so we are asking them to work with the air pollution control agencies and municipalities, et cetera, and to look at the priority measures. And then the MSAs will also be doing regional coordination. A lot of people have been asking me, how does it work when a state has the funding and then the MSA has the funding? I think that you'll find the inventories may look similar. Obviously, there's some policy strengths between whether or not you're a local government versus a state government, et cetera, on what areas you might be able to impact. I'd really like to close this. Oh, great. Okay. There is a request to do public stakeholder engagement. And so we hope that organizations will have what we're calling meaningful stakeholder groups. We haven't given a lot of guidance on this yet. I think a lot of organizations were trying to really like contact the agencies and reach out, and we're sort of thinking of these programs rolling out as sort of an umbrella organization where priorities are selected at the regional level or the state level for things that look all across the area evenly and fairly, and that folks sort of weigh in that process. And then, stakeholder groups should be able to communicate as frequently with the folks developing both the priority climate action plans and then eventually the comprehensive climate action plans. So under the Priority Climate Action Plan, or the PCAP, these are the required elements. The first is the greenhouse gas inventory. I know that there's already a Chicago Climate Action Plan and that inventories have been looked at. An entity can use an inventory they have developed, but we do encourage you to also consider looking at the data EPA provides through our inventories, and I have some slides on that later. You have to quantify what the measures would reduce in greenhouse gases for your PCAP, to look at the low income and disadvantaged community benefits analysis and how it would impact your low income and disadvantaged communities. And then again, authority to implement, which is really a policy consideration about what your organization could do and where your strengths lie. This is due March 1st, which is very soon, and we realize that. And I do want to say most organizations, so some organizations already have a climate action plan, some do not. You are welcome to start where you're at. So you do not have to start over if you already have one, you can build from there. Then for the comprehensive climate action plan, we want folks to have all of the things required in the PCAP, but additionally, there's going to be more LIDEC work. There's a workforce analysis piece. And then we're looking for leveraging federal funds to sort of do the next stage of projects under the 4-year period. And in the status report, which will probably be every 6 months or so, we're going to ask for our grantees to provide us information of what they're doing, the status of their measures, how they're going with the required elements, and sort of future funding resource needs. This is sort of standard work process that we would do under any grant with federal government. We will have technical assistance. We are starting our technical assistance actually later this month. There will be a series of webinars and trainings available to all of our grantees and likely other organizations as well on a variety of different topics. That is probably what we'll be doing from about Memorial Day through September. Then after September, we're going to be forming what we're calling our formal climate innovation teams. These are teams that will focus on specific topics. If folks really want to sort of dig down into, greenhouse gas inventories or transportation or buildings, we're going to have different climate innovation teams sort of around those topics. If there are topics that folks are particularly interested in, you're welcome to send them to me, actually. We're sort of forming the groups right now and figuring out what we should support and where the most need is. This is the schedule. We are well in the middle of this already. The states are required by the end of March to tell us if they were going to participate, and their plans were due at the end of April. All 6 of our states are in. The metro areas were at the end of April had to tell us if they were going to tend to apply. Their applications are due at the end of the month. And then tribes and territories are due in June. We are actually planning to award these grants as fast as we possibly can, with a July 1st start date, but likely as early as June, applicants can start accruing what we call pre-award costs if they wish to do so. Okay, and then the question everyone I think really wants to know about is implementation grants. This is a competitive process, so I can only say a few things about it, but I will say that the goal for the implementation grants is that organizations had to be covered by a plan, and that's in bold because covered means that this priority that you would seek for funding would be something listed in either a state plan or an MSA plan. If, say, a community wanted to do EV chargers, just throwing that out there, and it was covered by one plan, the MSA that you're in, or the state plan, you could apply for that either way. They don't necessarily have to be, they can overlap, but they can also be exclusive, where one organization can pick up one type of project and another organization that overlaps geographically can have another type of priority. So we will be releasing this funding later this year, and our goal is to have it open for what we would consider an extremely long time at the federal government, so that agencies can see the information that's in there, what we're looking for, and then have time to plan to sort of put forward what they think would be the best types of programs for their area. I think that a lot of folks think about sectors, and this is certainly a way we think about greenhouse gases. And so these are sort of the 6 priority sectors that we prioritize under the planning grants. And there are also things that I think you'll see in the implementation grants. These are sectors that I think are also well represented in the Chicago Climate Action Plan. So I don't think any of these are going to be particularly surprising to you. But I did want to take just one more minute and talk about inventories for a second. And I mentioned that because I want to say a couple of things. One is that I'll provide these slides later. EPA does have a lot of greenhouse gas inventory available. And so I do recommend that organizations take a look at it. It is web-based, easily searchable, not complicated, really just pull down menus and you can go in and look for information, both at our inventory, the US inventory of greenhouse gas emissions and sinks, or the greenhouse gas reporting program, where industry reports directly to us, which is sort of like the toxics release inventory of greenhouse gases. And we also have information under the National Emissions Inventory that's spatially has the highest resolution. This is from the greenhouse gas inventory of emissions and sinks. This is a 30-year snapshot of 4 different greenhouse gases. I think you can sort this by sector, which I know is the way a lot of folks think about this, but you can also sort it by greenhouse gas. And in this, you can see that carbon dioxide is still our largest source, which is red. And overall, in this 30-year time frame from 1990 to 2020, greenhouse gas emissions went down about 7% in the United States. I spend a lot of my time in the little green bar at the bottom, the fluorinated gas piece of this. Fluorinated gases are emitted in much lower quantities, but have very high global warming potentials. And so I want to show you a chart where we pull out just this little green sliver, and you can see that during the same time period in the United States, whereas greenhouse gas emissions went down 7%, fluorinated gases went up 87%. And so, they're used in a lot of things, semiconductors, EVs, a lot of the green economy things release fluorinated gases, which have global warming potentials typically of 1,000 to sometimes up to 10,000 that of carbon dioxide. And so one of the reasons we really asked folks to look at the inventory is to make sure that these things were considered as folks put together their climate action plans. And this I pulled out this morning really quickly for you just to see what fluorinated gases look like in Illinois over this 30-year time period. I mean, you can see that HCF 134A went up, I can't even, it's like 1 billion percent. It's a lot. So these gases are used quite extensively. So although we talk a lot about carbon, there are a lot of programs in the IRA for methane. I do want to mention that we should be looking across all the different gases as we move forward. And so for the EPA training, actually internally, we pulled out the climate action plan that comes from the Chicago region, really to sort of look at how climate action planning under the CPRG is slightly different than what I would call typical traditional climate action planning. And as you can see, there are areas where there are lots and lots of green check marks, which means you've already met a lot of these goals. But there's a couple places where there are red X's, where there's probably things that we're asking for under the CPRG program that was not considered under a traditional climate action planning process. And so you can see that you have an inventory, but the inventory doesn't consider industrial process, agriculture, forestry. You have projections, that's all green. You've got targets, you've got measures, benefits analysis, but you don't mention what we're asking for about co-pollutants that would also be beneficial in change if you impact. There are many things that you do can also impact things like particulate matter. There's a little bit more extensive requests on the low income and disadvantaged community benefits, the LIDEX section. The authority to implement, again, sort of who has the policy discretion to implement the types of greenhouse gas measures that you would be interested in doing, leveraging for funding going forward, and then the workforce planning analysis. So we haven't actually done this for anyone else, so it just happened that I had this for you, so hopefully that is helpful. But I think, I'll just say that Chicago is really on its way. There's been a lot of great work here done, and so we hope that the CPRG funding is helpful to sort of expand all the great work that's been done here and to move forward in the implementation phase. So thank you.
Erin, thank you for that. We do have some questions in the chat.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the chat.
Okay.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Reagan had a question. Reagan, do you want to ask that, or you want me to read that for you?
Thank you. I think my question, and help me if I've forgotten it already, but are there firms out there to assist municipalities with creating climate action plans? Are there identified firms? And then I also had a second question that I sent through to the group.
You were looking to see if these grants could be used for sustainability planning, I think was the kind of the first question you asked.
That's correct.
So these plans are fought for, in order to figure out how to cover the most geography, we're looking at regional and state plans or tribal plans. So in that sense, that we're not giving funding directly to small municipalities. I mean, they went to the the 67 largest metro areas in the United States. And so in the hopes that those plans would feed into this, and I think also when you think about a sustainability plan, you think about probably both adaptation and mitigation. And I'll just go back to the fact that this is really a greenhouse gas mitigation program. And so because of that, I think there's a lot of things that might go in a municipality sustainability plan, which would be a little bit different.
Okay, so Richmond Park as a standalone cannot apply for these funds. Is that correct?
You can apply for the implementation funds later, but your implementation work would not be for planning. It would be for reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
So then, Edith, I read your message to me. That means the environmental committee would take the lead on creating plans for municipalities?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. So the intention, and Nora and I will talk about how we're going to step this down next. So let's come back to your question after I present, but I'll just say the purpose of the climate action plan for the region has always been to make it easier for municipalities to move into action. And we have, I'll talk through the process about stepping it down I just got one slide on it. But yeah, the focus is on implementation money. And I agree with EPA's approach to try to make the planning done at a state and a regional scale. So everybody at the local scale can just move into action. And Nora's actually got a great tool that you may or may not have seen that even makes it on greenhouse gas emission summary that'll make it even easier for municipalities to move into action.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anyone else have questions?
And Edith, just so you know, this is Kevin Burns. I'm able to connect to the meeting. Unfortunately, not with a visual benefit, but I am via the microphone. So
okay,
I can see all of you, though. Everyone looks great.
You do too, in black and white there, Kevin.
Yes, it's my finest.
You look better than a green phone, so we're glad to have you with.
God help us. Any other questions regarding this subject or this topic, this section?
This is Bob. Just a question. Given the fact that the EPA is focusing on the regional items, I've long been an advocate for local agencies creating their own climate action plans in terms of getting up to speed. We have a time horizon for climate action that we're dealing with. And it would be nice to filter these actions down to those local municipalities so that they can act on those elements that are definitively within their purview, and not deal with the time delay in those coming down from the regional actors such as MMC and CMAP. So that I guess if there's a way to accelerate that filter down, I would much appreciate it.
And Robert, I'll also address that sort of the municipally framed actions when I just have a couple slides, but I'll talk about that.
Thank
You
you.
also mentioned that Cook County has grants for 5 communities to create caps.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a call for projects. I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can probably accept the fact that we were given this money in August to roll it out in March, and trying to figure out how we cover the widest scale of geography as quickly as possible. It led to a lot of conversations. I'll just say.
I don't want to. Any progress is progress, and
yes.
I don't belittle it at all.
Yeah.
It's just there's an acknowledgement between what the regional elements have power and control over versus what local municipalities have control over, such as contracts for local garbage collection, bag taxes, things that they can choose to bring forward. And so it's something to consider. And thanks to Deb Kutzgut for putting that up. So,
yeah, I'll just say that, I think one of the main things we'll be thinking about in the next, so these funds were non-competitive. So I saw the question from Tessa about, do you need a letter? And at this point, there was no letter required because it was non-competitive. For the next round, we're really going to be thinking about greenhouse gas emissions. And so there are a lot of great things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint. But I do think thinking about what the measurement of those things are is going to be important. So, we have calculators on our website, like with the WasteWise program that can calculate, savings and greenhouse gas reductions on waste and recycling options. We have the Energy Star program, et cetera. But, I think the words that keep going around EP are deep decarbonization. And so thinking about what the projects are and the emissions reductions for those, and how we will balance those is probably key to thinking about successful programs in our next stage. I know a lot of folks have been contacting me about this program or that program, or there's literally hundreds of programs, right? Which are all fantastic programs. But I do think that the inventory piece is something for folks to keep their eye on. So that thinking about quantifying that. Okay, I think I don't want to take up more time because I think I know we have more speakers. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to hear from an Augustana alum. Just extraordinary, I tell you. Well, we continue on, folks. Again, I'm coming to you kind of half-baked today. Don't look into that too much. I'm on audio but not visual. So we're going to continue on and hear from our good friends, not only Edith Macro, who we all know as the Director of Environmental Initiatives at the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus, but also our friend Nora Beck, Program Lead for Air Quality and Water Resources at CMAP. And we're going to dive right in here, folks. We're going to be talking about how to deliver on the goals of the climate pollution reduction grant in our region. So without further ado, Edith, Nora, the floor is yours.
Okay, and Nora's going to
Great.
go first.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Burns. I will get right into sharing my screen. You all see it okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. I thought that I'd first start out just stepping through CMAP's current climate policies, our recent work, and some upcoming issues, and sort of this larger context in which CMAP is approaching climate action planning. And then I wanted to review the framework for climate action planning that Edith and I worked on furiously last month as we partnered together to submit a notice of intent to participate into the US EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Program. So I'll step through some of the sort of the design objectives that we were thinking about, the potential schedule, and how our partnership can work and bring the different strengths of our organizations together to work on this issue. And then I'm going to turn it over to Edith for more details on the 2021 Climate Action Plan and how that could be meet these objectives. And then we have some discussion questions for you as well. All right, I'm going to step into the first part. So onto 2050. CMAP's current goal is an 80% reduction of GHG emissions relative to 2005 levels by the year 2050. This was adopted back in 2018 when we updated our regional comprehensive plan. And it was based on our understanding of climate stabilization goals at the time as outlined in the Paris Agreement. But we all know that the science is evolving, the policy worlds are evolving, and it's time and it's an opportunity via the US EPA support to update this goal to reflect those national goals of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. You can see on this slide that we've got that performance indicator that we established in the plan in a table on the right, or a graph on the right, sorry. And you can see that the top line shows where we are today, and we've made some gains in recent years, decreasing by about 9% between 2010 and 2019. But we still have a long way to go to reach just that 80% goal, and now we need to rethink that vision to get to 2050, net zero by 2050. I did want to highlight that CMAP regularly maintains a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and perhaps many of you are familiar with it. We've been updating it roughly every 5 years, and we use it to track CMAP and the region's progress towards hitting those emission reduction targets. The inventory includes emissions from buildings, transportation, and waste, and all of this is done at the regional and county level. We do see, as we look at the US EPA requirements for the climate action planning, that we need to make an update on our inventory process. So we do have emissions from industries, but they're sort of mixed in with other emissions. But we do need to account for the emission sinks that are in the region. So there's some slight tweaks that we need to do to be a more comprehensive list as the US EPA has outlined. And we do provide local emission summaries for the region's 284 municipalities and the 77 Chicago community areas. This was an advancement that my colleague Jared Patton worked on, and we're very glad to have this resource. He might have presented to you about this in the past. The goal of these summaries is to provide that valuable data for communities as they are considering implementation strategies to reduce emissions. So you don't have to go through the legwork on gathering this data. We've done that for you for the vast majority of sources, and these also provide valuable indicators on electric vehicles and tree canopy coverage and all sorts of other information that can contribute to your implementation activities. I did want to mention a potential US DOT greenhouse gas emissions measure that CMAP is paying special attention to. So last summer, the US Department of Transportation published a notice of proposed rulemaking And that would require both states and MPOs to set declining greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for roadway travel on the national highway system. And that those targets need to be aligned with those national goals of hitting a 50% reduction from 2005 levels by 2030, and then a net zero reduction by 2050. So as we've noted before, these types of goals are already embedded in CMAP's policies, with some, though they need to be refined to hit these new net zero objectives. But this is something that would formalize the process and get included in our transportation planning and programming. And so we're really hoping that the regional climate action planning work that we are doing through this effort can inform these and provide that policy background of how we are going to hit these targets going forward. All right, so we were really excited to hear about the US EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Program. Edith and I, along with many others, started to have a conversation about how can we respond to this opportunity. And we started to outline a framework for that response. I did want to touch on some design objectives as we thought through our application, or as we were thinking through our application. And these really helped guide the decisions that we made going forward. So the first one is to build on existing work and harness partners' subject matter expertise. We have substantial work on climate action planning that have been completed by leaders in the region, including MMC, Cook County, the City of Chicago, among others, including many of you on this call. And so as Aaron alluded, there's no need to start from scratch. We really want to build on these existing assets and continue to refine and advance our implementation work. We also recognize that there's a short timeline, right? That the Inflation Reduction Act and the guidance that US EPA was given is a really tight time frame. The overall issue of climate mitigation presents a very short time frame for us to act to reach climate stabilization goals. And so we wanted to really focus in on making strategic updates and focusing in on those priority actions that can be the most effective at reducing emissions, and spend our time there, recognizing that we have an opportunity to really influence implementation dollars that are coming to the region. And that gets to the third point, I'm sorry, to position the region to be competitive for those implementation funds. And so as the NOFA for the implementation dollars come out, we want to be attuned and make sure that we're paying attention to that guidance and position the region to be competitive for that money. I think Aaron presented an overall time frame for the different deliverables that are required for the program, and I did want to just sort of highlight what those are on this chart, and step through these to really point out how we want to be strategic about meeting these deliverables and the deadlines. So the Priority Climate Action Plan that's due March 2024, quick turnaround. We also have the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. We have a little bit more time to work on that. It's due in the summer of 2025. And then the status report that can help close out and provide implementation progress to the region and to the federal government in the summer of 2027. And then, of course, throughout all of this is the implementation work that is already underway in the region. So first, I wanted to talk about updating the caucus's climate action plan. So clearly, a lot of great work has already been done to outline the mitigation strategies that we need. As I stated before, CMAP is committed to updating the GHG inventory to match the US EPA requirements. And so it's also an opportunity to bring the year forward up to 2019, because that's what we have in the regional inventory. It's also an opportunity to prioritize the most effective strategies. So the Climate Action Plan details a lot of different strategies, and some are clearly going to be more effective than others at reducing emissions. And it's our opportunity to really hone in on those ones. And clearly, we need to add some additional information about the low-income and disadvantaged communities, benefits analysis, and then review the authority to implement some of the strategies. The idea of our partnership here would be that MMC can really take the lead on advancing this work, and CMAP can assist on the more technical aspects. In the next deliverable is the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. So this is an opportunity to include those other sources of emissions and sectors that weren't as well addressed in the original plan. We can update the quantified reduction measures, the projections, and the target setting. And here we'll conduct that benefits analysis and be sure to include the co-pollutants that we know correspond with the emissions of greenhouse gas emissions. And this is an opportunity for CMAP to really shine here as we do transportation modeling and emissions modeling for the region. We need a workforce planning analysis here, and we need to identify other funding available to help implement the plan. And this is really an opportunity to leverage those other funding sources and look at our existing processes. CMAP in particular is looking to use this to update our long-range transportation planning and programming to be in better alignment with the goals of a climate action plan. And then last but not least, we need to report out on progress. And we hope to use our regularly scheduled update of the regional greenhouse gas inventory for the year 2025 to do so and include that in the report. We know we need to update quantified reduction measures and projections as we go along and reflect on any of that progress that we've made and including any updates on the authority to implement. That was a whirlwind. Edith, I'm going to pass it over to you now to talk about the different strategies. And I'm happy to take any questions, but maybe at the end, Edith, would that make sense?
I think that makes sense, Nora. We're kind of flowing together here, even though it's two different slide decks.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going. There we go. Do I need to swap the displays or is that working?
Yes, swapping the displays would be good.
Okay. There we go. That works.
Okay, looks good. Yes.
Okay, so thanks. I think most of you know me. I'm Edith Macker. I'm Environment Director for the Mayors Caucus. And I just wanted to fill in a few comments about where we are in the process that Aaron and Nora, just to kind of backfill where they were talking about. So the grants are competitive to the MSA and they're non-competitive to the MSA and non-competitive to the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois has already accepted the funding. So there's $3 million and it is being managed by DCEO. Right? Excuse me, IEPA is managing the planning process for the state of Illinois, which is really exciting for everyone outside of the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus region. And it is inclusive for everyone, even in the Mayors Caucus region. So that has been accepted and they have sent in a scope of work to EPA, US EPA, and many of us provided letters of support. There is some boundary overlap, and we'll go into what happens then with the MSA. So Wisconsin has also put one in, as has Indiana. There are a few states that haven't accepted yet. For our award to the Chicago Metro MSA, which includes portions of Wisconsin and portions of Northwest Indiana, we have also already accepted the award. The Mayor's Caucus is the lead organization for that, for the MSA work. And in partnership with CMAP, which is what Nora just described. We've accepted that. We're working on our scope of work now. That is due at the end of the month. So Nora and I and Kevin and Neil and Cheryl have been talking with each other and with the organizations, the planning organizations in Southwest Wisconsin, Southeast Wisconsin and Northwest Indiana on our scope of work. So if it seems like we're still working it through, we are. We've done a lot of work on this, but funding is accepted. We know we're going to do it, and we're just now putting the budgets together and working out the rough edges on the plan. And we've also provided letters of support for Wisconsin. Wisconsin has provided a letter of support for us. Just most important thing that Aaron was talking about in getting the CPRG grants accepted is to show collaboration. That was really where we're going. There was no question that we'd get the funding, but that we're talking to each other and we're collaborating, and we've communicated that. So now budget, scope of work. And as Nora said, we want to really leverage the strengths and the work that we've got in place, and the resources and strengths that we have as organizations and partners to make the most of this and make sure that we meet the requirements of the EPA. We really prioritize our work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as quickly and expeditiously as possible, and that every entity within our regions, both Illinois and the MSA for the Chicago metro region and Wisconsin and in Indiana, that everyone really maximizes their opportunity to get implementation grant funding. So that's been the focus of what we've been working on. And to quickly just review, so what I'll do now is just review the plan. Aaron showed the slide that kind of analyzed this, but just to remind those of you who haven't seen this before or haven't seen it summarized, we did launch a regional climate action plan in 2021. We did meaningful stakeholder engagement. Doesn't mean that we didn't miss a few parties or we couldn't improve on it, but did as well as we could. You might notice the dates on it. We launched during the pandemic. We started this planning process in 2019, and it was part of a global pioneering project with the Global Covenant of Mayors. It was funded by the European Union. And then we had local partners, including 53 municipalities and then 175 organizations participate in the development of these, the climate action plan for the Chicago region. Our plan, as Aaron said, does include mitigation, adaptation, and is rooted in equity. So for moving forward, we're really just going to focus on building out the mitigation portion of the plan. And then I wanted to address this specifically to Trustee Israel's point about how do you tailor this for municipal action. This is both the strength and the criticism of the climate action plan that we did for the Chicago metro region, is that it is wholly focused on municipal action. So everything in the regional climate action plan is tailored for those levers that municipalities have in climate action, and that is to lead by doing, to encourage others, including their constituents, and then other government agencies and businesses to take climate action and enact local codes and policies. So this is the strength for municipalities that want to use the plan. The gaps then is that we didn't look at other areas that we don't have influence over as much, like industry and agriculture. So that's part of what CMAP can bring to the table in terms of improving our plan. And then specifically looking at the mitigation section, this is the quantified measures that Aaron was talking about as a requirement. And you also saw this wedge that Nora showed specifically for transportation. But just to familiarize you real quickly with how the wedge works, we start with a baseline inventory. In this case, our plan is based on the 2015 inventory with greenhouse gas emissions at 119 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent a year. And then those wedges, if you follow the colors, show strategies for reducing emissions over time. That arrow that just popped in shows that emissions will rise as our population continues to grow. The goal is to drive those emissions down to zero. Our modeling with the tools that we were able to use through the Global Covenant of Mayors showed that we could model an 83% reduction. We can't get to net zero, even though we set that as a goal because we know it needs to be done. But looking at just the numbers, those strategies will get us down below 80%. One thing that I also wanted to point out about prioritizing by authority to implement, while we have some work to do on that, I wanted to point out the blue wedge in the middle there, the decarbonized energy sources, which is by far the biggest source of our emissions. This is power plants. And in the climate action plan for the Chicago region, municipalities have very little influence in this. So it's the biggest source of emissions. It's one that we can't do much about it other than to talk to our utilities and then to try to buy clean energy when we can. Other ones like building, clean energy policy, while there's a lot of work at the state, municipalities have a lot of authority over building codes and enforcement, and even in the stretch codes that we've been doing a ton of work on. So this does work a little bit into what's needed for the plan with prioritized strategies, objectives, and then projections. So here's the goals that we have, the net zero greenhouse gas emissions, which is an overall goal with interim targets, and these are considered science-based targets. And then just quickly to walk through the mitigation objectives, because again, these are in place, and the hope is that these are umbrella to strategies that inform the plan. We may need to adjust them, but they work so far pretty well. At a high level, we've got one that actually doesn't reduce emissions, but the necessary steps leading up to that is to demonstrate leadership to reduce emissions, including participating in the planning process here. Decarbonize energy sources from power plants, optimize building energy through efficiency and electrification, implement clean energy policies, again, local, state. Decarbonize transportation, which is using cleaner fuels for transportation. Reduce vehicle miles traveled, which means less personal cars and more transit and active transportation. Manage water and wastewater sustainably. This is all lumped together because it's a relatively small impact on emissions. And then we do have, Nora mentioned carbon sinks, but our plan is somewhat unique in that we actually use some urban forestry data to monitor sequestration from potential for sustaining ecosystems. And then just a little more detail on the plan, looking at the one objective to decarbonize transportation. This is what the strategies look like in the climate action plan. And this is just a snapshot of it, but with a particular eye to how this may suit what we need to have for the EPA climate pollution reduction grant. Looking at the particular strategy there within the objective decarbonize transportation, this is one that we're doing a lot of work on currently through our EV readiness program for municipalities. We're looking at adapting development processes to accelerate investment in EV charging infrastructure. And our next speaker, Chris Meister, will also talk about that. As far as municipal authorities, again, it's not quite there, but if you look at the municipal role with our little icons, this does say that a local government has the ability to enact codes and policies to achieve this strategy. And in terms of prioritizing, there are some good first steps here with some rough estimates of costs and effort required. So this can help us prioritize. The GHG reduction potential just puts into words what we have in the modeling, which says that whether or not that particular strategy is a good one for high impact reducing emissions. And not shown on this chart, we also have in this same climate action plan, we have equity considerations, which is the beginning of that low income disadvantaged communities benefits analysis that both Nora and Aaron mentioned. We do have ideas for implementation regarding partners, and then outcomes and co-benefits, which again, pretty good basis for what we need to build on to get to the finished product of a prior climate action plan. And so again, look, this is the third time you'll see this analysis of where we're at with the plan. But I'm going to focus just on the priority climate action plan for the region. And just again, to what Nora was talking about in terms of the strategy for utilizing our strengths, the PCAP could be most effectively drawn from the climate action plan for the region. And if you're looking at the PCAP elements, this is the one that needs to be done 8 months from the time we get the go-ahead from US EPA. And so the green is in the PCAP what we already have in place. And then we're going to debate the GHG inventory because Aaron said we already had that part done. We do have a little bit of work to update it, both for the addition of the MSA areas in Wisconsin and Indiana, and then to get the sectors we missed, we may want to get that updated to 2019. So that's kind of yellow. Have we done it? The disadvantaged community benefits we need to build on for sure. And then I've got some ideas about the authority to implement. I think we've got some work done on that. So the PCAP is in pretty good shape for moving us forward. We also have some elements there from the CCAP, or the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, that there's a little more time to get done. So we can borrow from the PCAP to complete what's required for the CCAP. And we are also encouraged to get some of the work done earlier in terms of those that are done, highlighted there in green. I won't go into the details of, because Nora and Aaron already talked about what else needs to be done, but just to talk about the handoff between CMAP and the Mayors Caucus. The Mayors Caucus did the climate action plan for the region because it needed to be done. And the primary purpose for doing it was always to try to unite the strength that we have as a region through the Greenest Region Compact, the Environment Committee, the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus, the work that we've done together to leverage climate action. That was its purpose. Its ongoing purpose then, and where the gaps are, is to try to enable climate action for municipalities. And so now I'm going to specifically address how municipalities can use this. But just to reiterate what Nora was getting at, the Mayor's Caucus is not a planning agency. I am not a planner, but I'm the co-author of the Climate Action Plan. So we couldn't be more thrilled to have CMAP as a participant in this climate pollution reduction grant process, because of their ability to carry the planning process and the action forward, to make it bigger, better, and to carry it into the future and bake it into regional leadership in a way that the Mayor's Caucus can't. So I just wanted to be really clear about the partnership that we have. We are focusing, and because we were able to do a climate action plan, and if you didn't know this, the climate action plan for the region was not a funded project, right? We didn't get a budget to do this work. We leveraged partnerships. We got a $10,000 cash contribution from a foundation at about 10 months into the project. And we're able to do it because we're nimble and scrappy. And we can continue that for the 8-month period of time to get the PCAP done. But CMAP has much more capacity to carry this longer into the future. So that's how we're splitting up the work. I want to focus on some of the things that have been asked and mentioned by mostly our audience and our committee members, rather than addressed yet by either Aaron or Nora. But this particular portion of the CPRG project really tickled me. And that is the idea of using metrics. And I just put some quotes there in terms of what EPA allows and is looking for. So EPA is encouraging use of our existing climate action plan and adopting robust metrics and reporting programs to track emissions reductions. And we have had, since before we started the CAP planning process, many of you were on that. Kevin Burns was involved in the, as was Aaron, involved in a task force that we had of this committee to consider tracking and reporting platform and processes that would both help measure progress at a regional level with a different focus than we can just get at a greenhouse gas inventory, but mostly to provide feedback to municipalities. And then Regan, I'm specifically talking to you here about what municipalities can do. So we're a little choppy here with some of the tools, but we've had a lot of conversation, a lot of interest from municipalities over the years now in being able to get this some kind of a snapshot, a report, or a dashboard so that they can report out on their progress. I've always had a crush on sustainable Jersey since we launched the Greenest Region Compact in 2016. Cheryl and I just got back from meeting with them and other sustainable state programs in New York last week. But we are hoping that the CPRG funds will allow us to finally build out a tracking reporting system. We're really close to getting it done, and it won't take too much just to move us from the tools that we have. And this is where, Reagan, to kind of your point, it gets choppy. But we have a really good framework in the Greenest Region Compact. We have 152 communities that support the goals of the Greenest Region Compact. We have some 20 that have used the Greenest Region Compact tool to create their own sustainability plans. And we can do more workshops on that. It's been a while. We haven't updated it with the climate action plan strategies, which you see in the slide below. yet there's overlap and similarities. So the hope is that we not only do the work that EPA needs us to get the PCAP done, but that we also align across the Climate Action Plan and the GRC to provide more support and tools for municipalities to take this kind of climate action. In many ways, the planning could be done with the tools that we have with CMAP's help. The Mayors Caucus will align these. And the intent is that municipalities can use the greenhouse gas snapshots that CMAP produced, align it with these priority actions, looking at their roles and the specific emissions for their community, and be able to make a modified climate action plan and move ahead mostly towards implementation, because that's going to be most meaningful for municipalities. And then EPA with implementation funding that is coming out later this year, even before the PCAP, if you didn't catch the timing on that, also seems focused on implementation. So I think that's where we align. And I apologize for kind of talking a little bit more than I think we had timed for. Chris is here and ready to speak. So we have some discussion questions. Should we hold on these, Nora? Or should we try to, any pressing questions, either from our audience or from who we have in chat?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much time we have available. I'm super curious about people's responses to these. So if we do have time, it'd be great for maybe we can get on another agenda in the future.
Yeah. If we could encourage some chatting, because I want to make sure that we allow Chris, who's here, to speak. I'm looking at the questions, and Christina, you've got a question about, can someone talk about how communities can start taking meaningful actions? I think that's a difficult question. That's going to vary a lot by communities. It's political will, it's the availability of resources, it's the agency and the ability to act. So I think that's just a tough question. And then Marta makes a really good point about transportation, including garbage, recycling, compost, and collection miles traveled, which is totally true. That's where we're seeing the waste, but it's more in transportation. And thank you, Bob, for the shout out on metrics. I agree. So there we go. We've got some. Thank you, Cheryl, for putting those in the chat. And then please respond. And I think in the interest of fairness to all of our speakers, Kevin, do you want to go through turning it over to talk about the climate bank?
Here we go. Can you hear me okay now?
We got you.
Great. So we will continue on, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Chris Meister, who's the Executive Director of the Illinois Finance Authority. The Illinois Finance Authority is our state's infrastructure bank. It is one of the largest issues of private activity bonds in the nation. Private activity bonds, or PABs, or federally tax-exempt conduit infrastructure bonds. Now, how's that for a complication? Enables local governments and 501c3 organizations to finance their capital infrastructure projects at generally lower interest rates and longer maturities. The Illinois Finance Authority is now our state's climate bank. Chris has served as the IFA's executive director since 2009. Chris has overseen the presentation, approval, and closing of over 390 individual transactions involving privately owned capital projects and publicly owned infrastructure with an estimated dollar value of $13.7 billion. Chris conducted a 6-year tenure with the U.S. EPA's Environmental Finance Authority Board, and Chris is a graduate of the University of Illinois College of Law and DePaul University's College of Liberal Arts. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Meister, otherwise known as Chris. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. I appreciate the kind introduction. I've known Edith for many, many years, and also great to see a lot of other familiar names and partners. So I will share my screen on what I hope is a informative deck that then Edith can share with you. Again, Kevin gave a great summary. In September of 21, we were named in the big energy legislation, CEJA, some of you are familiar with, as the climate bank. We basically had three big priorities: distribute the benefits of clean energy in an equitable manner, make clean energy accessible to all, and do this all in a way that reflects the geographic, racial, ethnic, gender, and income diversity of our state. In a moment, I'll tell you why that just really fits in nicely with our longstanding state statutory directives. These are sort of the breakdown of the powers.
Chris, can I interrupt you, please?
Sure.
Would you mind showing the presenter's view? So if you've got words on there, we can see them better. It's in, just
how
show
do I do that?
If you go to presentation from beginning, if not, we can make it work.
Okay.
Slideshow up at the very top. You click on slideshow.
Just hit F5.
Oh, F5. How's that? Is that better?
No. Go back to slideshow at the top, and then it'll say from beginning or from current slide.
Okay. I'm getting it on mine. Okay,
then you might need to swap displays.
Okay. Can somebody
Never
on your
mind.
end
No, just go ahead. I think we can
it?
see it. No, just go ahead. You're fine.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, guys.
No
It's looking that way for mine. And now, unfortunately, Edith.
Maybe stop share and start share again.
All right. Stop share.
Oh God, all we see is you now, Chris. That's not good at all.
That's a terrible, terrible
Isn't
thing.
that just terrible?
How about now?
Oh, look at
Great.
that. Awesome.
Perfect. You guys are great. Okay.
Thank you.
So that's the statutory purpose. These are our powers. We got the nameplate. Support clean energy and water, something that we've long been doing. Provide working capital, refinancing and joint ventures, which I think may end up being of interest to this group, given the given some of the disadvantaged community imperatives of a lot of this federal funding, and administering programs. And of course, we've got a bunch of municipal folks here. So where's the money going to come from? I'm about to tell you. Unlike just about everybody else in the state, IFA did not get any additional funding through the state CEJA legislation. However, we did get the nameplate and the expanded powers, which I think are going to be very helpful. So working with the governor's office and an interagency group, we've been very, very focused on chasing pots of federal money, which, given what I've just heard, ought to be very interesting to all of you. Let's see. This is our record of not just the IFA, but climate bank purposes and successes. Many of you have probably not heard of us much. Again, we've really been focused over the past several years on doing our job as a financial utility issuing tax exempt bonds mainly on behalf of nonprofit health systems and universities, but we have developed quite a national reputation on partnering with the IEPA, which many of you have loans through their state revolving fund. And we've been going to the capital markets on their behalf, on behalf of this AAA credit, the last two being green designated. So last calendar year alone, we deployed 230 plus million in private capital bond proceeds to help local governments across the state invest in their clean water, drinking water, and sewer infrastructure. We've also were intimately involved with various versions of the commercial clean energy finance or commercial property assessed clean energy bond, or CPACE legislation. And we've been working with a wide variety of private lenders and local governments throughout the state on what we regard as a model mousetrap for that. We've recently had some successes in Springfield, Skokie, and Rosemont. Importantly, and again, I was glad that I joined earlier, 65% of these private capital investments made last calendar year were either made in or benefited disadvantaged communities. So let's talk about some of the other things where you may have run across our name. We've long had a partnership with the Office of the State Fire Marshal for low interest fire truck and ambulance loans. We provided the startup loans for the consolidated first responder, police, and fire pension investment funds, which I think ultimately are going to benefit your taxpayers. We've long had the ability to issue conduit bonds on behalf of local governments and school districts and get the state tax exemption in addition to the federal tax exemption that many of you can do on your own. I think in a rising interest rate environment, that will be probably more of interest to many of you. But I think importantly, and I think this was really the trigger why we got named the Climate Bank. In February of 21, some of you may have recalled over President's Day weekend, there was a deep freeze in Texas, and this had a splatter pattern that extended to municipal gas utilities in Illinois because of the way that the state of Texas was conducting its energy policy. Many of these small towns, mainly in downstate, faced rather dramatic and immediate price spikes despite their best efforts to avoid that on their ratepayers. And the governor called on us, and we were able to, with our existing authority and with our existing balance sheet, to come up with some low interest loans and basically deploy them very rapidly in the space of about 6 or 7 weeks. One of the things that we stumbled upon is, while it's very easy for the authority to lend money to municipalities, it's somewhat more difficult for municipalities to borrow from us. So we worked to introduce House Bill 3340 that makes it, that allows municipalities to borrow from the finance authority at this same basis that you would your local bank, given the pots of federal money that we hope are coming our way. We hope that that will ease the ability to create programs on a whole variety of climate finance matters that municipalities in northeastern Illinois will find very attractive. We figured it out with these natural gas loans, but House Bill 3340 will make it easier. Passed unanimously through the House, and it passed last week through the Senate, so it's on its way to the governor. Something else that we're very proud of is our CPACE open market initiative. Again, nonpartisan, non-political program. We have statewide authorizations, and we've aimed this like a laser beam, like scalpel, at the needs of local government and municipal decision makers, as well as the needs and expectations of private lenders. Again, this is a developing space. There is no public subsidy. The lower interest rate and the longer term of the debt is created by an additional lien that the primary lender agrees to on commercial property only. That leads to that's on the same level as a property tax lien. More information there. I've got my colleague, Brad Fletcher. He's an expert on this, and he can talk to your folks if you're interested. I think that over the long term, given what Edith said and what the various planning is about the amount of carbon in connection with construction and the overall built environment, I think this will become an essential tool. Importantly, it mobilizes private capital, purely private capital. This slide is what I affectionately refer to as the alphabet and number soup. These are our priorities in the past months and the coming weeks and months. Again, we've at the end of March, we submitted something under what's called 101D, grid resilience. I know some of your members here in Northeastern Illinois, including you, Kevin, have your own municipal utilities, but given the priorities of Department of Energy, we have been focusing on municipal utilities, particularly in downstate. This is about reliability and resilience, and we're doing it with an eye towards disadvantaged communities. We're scheduled to get $16 million of this 5-year, $40 million federal commitment in the coming months. Elena, always good to see you. Thanks to Elevate, we were able to partner for a building performance hub competitive grant for $4 million. That one was submitted. We appreciate our partnership with Elevate. Small business climate initiative. This is really going to be aimed at climate contractors, businesses with an eye towards BIPOC or disadvantaged. We are in a collaborative dance with our partner agency, the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. We expect to receive that money by June 30th, and then have that starting to be a resource, again, that's motivated by the mobilization and the recycling of private capital. With our close partners at IEPA, again, they've done an extraordinary job of the state on the state revolving fund, and we've worked very hard to get them $1.8 billion in capital, since together the two agencies reworked that program. But we're scheduled to get $15+ million, again, a revolving fund, again, aimed at the built environment, again, coming in the coming months. Moving to our priorities this week. Back in June, many of you know that the governor is intensely focused on EVs. We have a EV lead, Mega like Ashura, who many of you have probably talked to. I will tell you that there is a level of coordination and interagency focus under the leadership of the governor's office that is really quite remarkable. On this competitive GRIP application, again, we're partnering with rural co-ops and with municipal utilities. We expect to get our application in tomorrow, or at the latest by the 19th. Again, focusing on small towns. The CFI, the charging and fueling infrastructure. Again, I see Cook County on this call. No, my colleague Andrew Barbeau has been working with Cook County. Edith has been gathering sites. We have been gathering sites. The city of Chicago is likely going to do something on its own. Again, what our DC folks have advised us is there is, given the fire hose of federal money and the alphabet and number soup, we're trying to approach the federal delegation in an intentional manner. I think everybody on this call, plus the governor's office and the General Assembly, we all share the same goal, which is to get Illinois' fair share, and if there's anything left over, to get some of that as well, given that we are a federal donor state and some of our redder states don't appreciate the money that we send them, apparently. So we're very optimistic on the CFI. Again, with the governor's goal of 1 million EVs under CEJA by 2030, I think it's somewhere in the order of 50 to 100,000 charging stations, and the fact that we have 5,000 or 6,000 in the state today, probably not enough to meet that goal. The CFI competitive grant probably helps. We're partnering with Edith. But one of the larger ones is coming up. There is no NOFO on the street. It's called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Again, I thank everybody on this call for all the work you've done on climate planning with an eye towards disadvantaged communities. So this is $27 billion. There's 7 of it that is aimed at solar, although solar for disadvantaged people, although the April 19th 50 pages seems to have opened the door for things like transmission support and electric vehicles and battery. And then there's $14 million in what's called the fund that's been described as a way to help seed green banks, like the Illinois Climate Bank is the IFA, and also the accelerator, which is $6 billion to seed smaller lending institutions. Again, we're watching this carefully and we're providing for that, and we have a record of success and delivery on some of these issues. Again, the alphabet soup and number soup is somewhat confusing. So we added this graphic. My colleague Andrew Barbeau, who some of you may have run across, put this together. This is sort of a way of describing the alphabet and number soup, but I do want to point all the way into my lower right corner, hopefully it's yours, the DOE Loan Programs Office. This is very important because I think that the LPO is suitably obscure enough that it may survive any sort of debt ceiling negotiations. Some of you may have heard of a couple of its success stories 12 years ago during stimulus, which was the creation of Tesla and inflicting Elon Musk on all of us, as well as a less successful endeavor called Solyndra. But this is what everybody on this call ought to know is, number one, it is led by a visionary guy who grew up in Illinois, in Sterling, Illinois, Jigar Shah. He's very active on climate, social media. Again, a genius. But this is what Joe Biden and Jennifer Granholm and the US Congress and Jigar Shah have pulled off. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill, they opened up loan program federal guarantees to SEFIs, state energy financial institutions. That just happens to be the Illinois Finance Authority as the climate bank. and it removed what had been the innovation requirement. The U.S. Department of Energy has been very, very explicit about what I am about to say. Basically, their goal is to partner with states, with local governments, with utilities, large and small, to come up with a way to deploy federal guarantees in the same way that federal single-family home mortgages are deployed to benefit ordinary working people, so that ordinary working people will have an interest rate that they will be able to afford with predictable terms that they will be able to afford, in the same way that single family home ownership was spread across this country since the New Deal, thus creating wealth in communities, but without the racism and the redlining. DOE has been very explicit about that. If you've ever heard Shalaya Morissette, who is very active in talking about these issues on behalf of DOE, you'll know what I mean. So that's the longer term goal after we reach through this alphabet and number soup and hopefully get a lot of this money and ultimately turn it into products like CPACE and the State Revolving Fund that will benefit local governments and local taxpayers in a real way. Here's a one-pager on a little deeper focus on the CFI, the charging and fueling infrastructure. Here's one on the GRIP. Here's one on the grid. What would be helpful? Again, work with Edith on getting your locations in. I have a feeling that all of these various applications will coalesce in some form together, because it's really hard to reach $15 million in specific locations in $12,000 bites, and to do that by June the 30th. The other element, and again, this is the advantage of working with the IFA, is we do have a balance sheet. We do understand finance. We've had some success at it. And match is a pretty important part. So we've had some conversations with the utilities, and we're figuring out that in a way that will be user-friendly for municipalities and local governments across the state. These are the three big buckets that represent our initial and near-term strategy. Grant programs, something that we've not done a lot of, but since some of the alphabet and number soup do not have an obvious home in Illinois state government, we're not organized along the lines of, say, New York NYSERDA. So that has fallen to the IFA as the climate bank. There's going to be a big focus under both CEJA and in the federal funds in supporting BIPOC and disadvantaged businesses. And project financing, again, for public fleet electrification, school buses. Again, with House Bill 3340, we're already looking at ways with or without some of these federal fundings to set up very, very user-friendly ways for municipalities to borrow from the IFA, hopefully supplemented and expanded through private capital for the infrastructure for EV charging and or EV fleets. So that is what we are working on. Hopefully I didn't talk too long, and maybe Edith, somebody can help me with the questions.
Yes, Edith and Cheryl will be monitoring, or are monitoring, the questions. Thank you, Chris, very much. there's lots of,
Yeah, okay, so GGRF and the CPG, let's see here. Aaron has responded. You know, again, we have some singular goals that I think are aligned with everybody on this call, which is getting the most money for Illinois, our fair share, and whatever is left on the table, get some of that too. GGRF is one of those things, and I think once we get the money, once we fully understand the notice of funding, whenever that's released, we hope that that will become a resource in some form or fashion to local governments, businesses, and individuals. What other questions? What am I missing here?
Any others specifically for Chris and the Illinois Climate Bank?
Yeah, here I got one from Marta Kane at 10:56. You know, again, that's the advantage of having a development finance agency involved with this. One of the types of projects that benefit under the federal tax code is something called solid waste, which is traditionally meant landfills. Solid waste is defined by the federal tax code as solid and without value. This has traditionally been used by private businesses for landfills, but it has been used for parts of coal-fired power plants and ethanol plants. But we have done at least one project where a electronics recycler was using it to demanufacture or extract metals, hopefully metals that can be used for an EV future. So.
there's a good question here from, let's see.
Tim is asking for an example of how municipalities would access these lending programs.
And before you answer that one, Chris, there's a quick question from Christina Murphy in Aurora. Just the federal grant open now is due June 1st or June 13th. That's correct.
Yes. Yeah. June 13th. It was changed yesterday from May 30th. Okay. And again, we're lucky that we have great and effective state leadership in Washington through the governor's DC office, and they have been very, very good at focusing the attention of the delegation, which we're also very fortunate to have. So I think over the coming weeks, we'll have conversations with the caucus and with other entities. I mentioned we've already had some conversations with Cook County and with others. So hopefully we'll, in the coming weeks, we'll be able to coordinate this in a way that maximizes the return to Illinois taxpayers and Illinois communities.
Okay. Anything else pressing, Edith or Cheryl or Chris, that you see?
Wait. Here, Christina from Aurora.
Right.
Yeah, that's the intent. We need to get the money first in order to distribute them or create structures that are hopefully financial structures that can be used to recycle in an effective in a cost-effective way for local governments, so that we can so that we can reduce the burden of our strapped property taxpayers and ratepayers. Tim Milburn, so how would you access these right now? The one that is live, we have model ordinances. We've got a multiple approved lenders. There's the link to Illinois CPACE. Again, that's a product that gets, I think, better and better every week. Again, it's still developing, but we're in the bond business, and the bond business is long term. The success of the state revolving fund, I think, is really a great example of that. You know, we first reworked that program and reintroduced that credit to the capital market back in 2013. And, you know, all these years later, there's $1.8 billion of private capital that's been deployed to enhance human health outcomes in our state, water quality, put people to work building these projects, and do it at a lower cost of capital than municipalities if they went to the capital markets themselves. That's the way it's designed. To my knowledge, that's the most effective double or triple or quadruple bottom line climate finance tool in the country, and we would look to replicate features of that.
Great, thank you. We began at 4 minutes after the hour. We're now at 40 minutes prior to the hour, so we're only about 6 minutes behind schedule, but nevertheless, it's a great time to wrap up. Chris, thank you very, very much, and all the other speakers, thank you. Our next meeting, and this is going to be a tour, we're touring Countryside's Net Zero Village Hall on Tuesday, June 20th from 10 a.m. to 11:30. It's in person. It's going to be a hoot. It's going to be fun. Countryside has agreed to provide all of us lunch anywhere we want in Illinois. So that should be fun. So with that, let's wrap things up. Again, thank you for putting up with me when my camera broke. I appreciate everyone's time and attention and participation in today's call. We hope to see you in a month in the beautiful village of Countryside. Until then, be safe, be well, be good, and thanks again.